Good day, everyone. I hope you're doing well. We are moving on to Module 6, and now we're going to transition into language sample analysis. So we have three main goals for you today. First, I'm going to describe different options for language sample analysis so you can get an idea of what's available to you. Then we would like you to carefully consider how you would like to expand or enhance your practices with language sample analysis. Finally, for the application activity, we want you to let us know your plan. We'll keep it simple this month as we transition into our next sequence of learning activities. So thinking back to where we've been, we've covered both norm-referenced and criterion-referenced testing. Within criterion-referenced testing, we focused a lot on questionnaires, observations, reviewing student work. These are essential elements to our comprehensive evaluations. And we can see how these multiple pieces of assessment data help with our converging evidence framework. So this figure here is from a great paper describing how to use multiple pieces of data for our assessments. This paper does a great job of showing how converging evidence is important for all of our students, especially those who speak multiple languages, speak a different dialect, or have a unique lived experience that can introduce biases within our traditional testing. Now, looking at their converging evidence, we see many of the things we've talked about already. We see, parent, teacher, clinician ratings, concerns, so we can get these from interviews, questionnaires. We talked about our standardized norm-referenced assessments. We talked about observation. And we also see a critical piece of this converging evidence framework is looking directly at students' connected speech and language production. Another word for that, language sample analysis. Another thing we focused on in our time together is the educational impact of children's communication difficulties. Through our videos and communities of practice, we have seen how academic standards can help ground our clinical decision making. I'd like to take a few minutes to look back at some of the documents we put together and think about how we can use converging evidence to address our core standards-based questions. So let's look at some of those core questions that we developed for looking at elementary language skills. So, the standards talk about difficulty with curricular vocabulary and grammar. Looking at discrete vocabulary and grammar skills are often done by some of our norm reference tests. We also talked a lot about our questionnaires and observation and reviewing of student work, and that's what we really need to do and think about to start getting at some of these more applied academic questions, such as having conversations, asking questions, telling stories, summarizing main ideas, providing explanations, quality of social relationships. Those different types of criterion reference assessments can really provide great insight into those different areas. We also can think about how language sample analysis can give us a unique insight into these different academic skills. Right? So if we want to see how our students are doing at having conversations, we could do a language sample and look at their conversational skills. If we want to see how they produce stories or provide explanations, we could sample their production of those stories and explanations. There's some tools that allow us to look at vocabulary and grammar, so things like mean length of utterance or utterances that have grammatical errors or syntactic errors. We can get at some of those skills. And then we can even get at perspective taking and taking listeners' needs into mind when producing discourse to look at some underlying core causes of social relationships. Now, when we look at our early childhood core questions, we again see how language sample analysis can help us answer many of these questions. How are our kids doing with conversations, asking questions, seeking clarification? So can we observe a sample of their conversational discourse? Observe a sample of their production of stories or explanations. Look at things like MLU or lexical diversity, taking perspective. Similarly with our secondary students, are they able to have those high quality conversations, present their opinions and look at persuasive discourse, and then also looking at social relationships. So if we can look at these skills in multiple ways, what is it that language samples really add? Well, one thing that is hopefully clear is that they look at aspects of functioning that most of our norm reference tests are missing. Most of our norm reference tests, especially in language, are looking at discrete vocabulary and grammar skills, whereas these language samples are looking at those more functional aspects of communication. We also can do a direct probe, and that probe gives us a very rich description of these different functional academic skills. So when we compare that to questionnaires or observation, we're having to rely on someone else's interpretation and impression as opposed to getting a direct probe indicating their current functioning. And we also know that language samples are less biased for many of our students. So now let's take a look at some of the different options that we have with language sample analysis. The first consideration is transcription. So when most of us think of language sample analysis, we think back to graduate school or our current practice and doing things like analysis with SALT or writing down a record of what the student said. So some things we know with transcription: it does take some training and it does take some time to do the transcripts. We also know that having a transcript available allows you to do more in-depth analysis of the student's language ability. Also, it's really nice because we have a written record of the student's performance that we can share with other team members and keep as a record over time. Now, with transcription, there is the possibility of having someone transcribe for you. Some districts have centralized transcription available, or they may outsource for transcription, or individual SLPs may connect with someone who can help them with transcription. So this really can help along with the process. It can take out one of the major time barriers, but please be aware, even if you have someone else transcribe for you, that doesn't mean all your work is done. You still need to know about how transcription works and what those the transcription codes are. You need to know how the software works and the different measures. For example, there are many districts that have someone available to transcribe for them, and still a lot of people don't use it because it takes some time and effort to really understand the process. So that said, when we're thinking about language sample analysis with transcription, there's two major options that we're going to think about. One is SALT, and that is a specialized software that assists with the transcription and getting automated analysis of the transcript. And then there's Sugar, which is more just guidelines for how to do computerized language sample analysis in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Then we also have some non-transcription options. So there's some different materials that have been developed that don't require transcription. Usually they have some type of rubric that you use to evaluate certain aspects of the language sample. So there's the narrative language measures from Cubed. You may have heard of the SLAM cards, and then there's just various other rubrics that are available. So for the application activity, this module, we'd like you to review some materials that we put together describing different language sample options. And I'm going to show you those in a Google Drive, on a Google Doc in just a minute here. So we want you to review the materials and think about what would be the best fit for you and your students, what is something that's going to be of interest to you to pursue, and then something that you feel you have the capacity to undertake. And then we're going to ask you to rank order your preferences. So there'll just be a quick little survey so we can see which of the different options you're interested in and which you may be most likely to use. And then you can just be ready to start the language sample modules. So moving forward, we're going to have different options available for you based on your interests and your needs. So that's why we really want to get your feedback to see what your preferences are so we can be prepared to meet everyone's needs. Okay, so this document summarizes the different major options that we've identified. Let's start by comparing the two options that require transcription. So we have SALT and Sugar, And if you want to click and learn more, we have links here that will take you to different sites. You don't need to do in-depth, review or study of this now if you don't want to. If you want to, certainly you can, but that's where we're going to go in the future. So with SALT, the age weight range is really wide, early preschool, early childhood through adolescence. You can look at multiple types of discourse. It has a lot of protocols that can be downloaded. If you're going to do narrative retells, you do need to get some books. There's a lot of different language sample measures that you can get with SALT. So this is just showing some examples, but looking at vocabulary and grammar as well as discourse and organization and things like that. It also has multiple databases that are embedded in the software. And that's a really nice thing is you can have your transcript, have it compared to dozens or up to 100 kids who also did the same discourse task and get automatic printouts of means and standard deviations. There is quite a bit of material available for both English and Spanish speakers, and it's available for PC and Mac. But Chromebooks, I believe they can be an issue. So, this is software that has to be paid for. There may be a way to get it through your district. The district does have some funds with this grant. Your district may have or may in the future have transcription services available. So just some things to consider. I would say, if you have access, if you have interest, if you're kind of all in for language sampling, this is going to be the most thorough, in-depth way of approaching it. If you're going to go through the effort to transcribe and learn transcription, you can really get a lot of valuable information out of those transcripts and really look at a lot of different types of discourse. The other major option is called Sugar. So Sugar is more early childhood, preschool, and early elementary, really only looking at conversational discourse. So they don't have protocols or comparison data for narratives, exposition, or anything else. You can download a protocol. You basically get mean length of utterance. That's the main measure that you get. And what they basically did is used line number counting and total word counting embedded within software, within Google Docs or Microsoft Word, and then just show you how to divide, the total words by total utterances, and you get MLU. So it's basically a standardized way of doing hand transcription using Microsoft Word, Google Docs. They do have tables that you can download for comparisons for these ages. The materials right now are English only, and there really are no major software requirements. You don't have to pay for anything. So I would say, if you're really interested in transcription, upping your transcription game, you're mainly interested in something like MLU, mean length of utterance. You're mainly interested in early childhood, preschool, early elementary, then Sugar may be a good fit for you. So those are the two transcription options. There is also Clan or Childis. All the surveys that I've done and that have been published show that not a lot of people use this. It is free software that's available, but it's a little bit more clunky and less intuitive than some of these other point and click type of options. If you're interested in learning more, I absolutely would love to talk to you. Just shoot me a message. We did identify a few different options here for options that don't require transcription. So one is Cubed. This is a battery of assessments that includes the narrative language measures. So you can do something in grades pre-K through 8 and really looking at narrative discourse skills. And there's lots of different types of iterations here. They have some questions and answer materials. There are, a lot of materials. When you get mastery of this tool, it can be a pretty feasible tool to implement. but it does take a bit of front loading of training in order to get up to speed on everything. It has different types of listening tasks. It has some reading tasks. You can do some adaptations. It has materials in English and Spanish. Um, has some related dynamic assessment prompts. The paper and pencil version is free for now, at least. You can pay for online scoring. There are some related intervention materials. So if you've heard of Story Champs, that's the intervention that's associated with this cubed assessment. So I would say, if you're working preschool, early elementary, really interested in starting to do more narrative language samples, cubed would be great. If you're getting into mid-elementary, that could still be some good opportunities to apply cubed, especially if you're also looking at narrative skills and possibly reading. If you're interested more in social pragmatics concerns, then we can look into the SLAM cards. So you've probably heard of the SLAM cards. This is from the Leaders Project. And, it's a simple picture prompt, and it's showing problems, asking for inferences. It's kind of similar to some of those social pragmatic hypothetical tasks. It gives you broad insight into narrative skills, syntax cohesion. Like I said, really, I think while the cubed looks more at academic narrative language, SLAM cards are a bit more theory of mind, perspective taking, social pragmatic. If you're working more in middle school, high school, and interested in those social pragmatic areas, then the SLAM cards may be good for you. What we have here in the next row, these are actually some materials that were that I was involved in developing. So these are materials that were developed for SALT, but you could conceivably, I think you could administer these materials, to your students and just review them for their overall organization and quality. So one is expository, the other is persuasion. So in expository, we ask kids to describe their favorite game or sport. And, when we do this, we have a protocol that we can use that has them plan out what they're going to discuss. And then we have a rubric that we can use to analyze it. We also have materials for persuasive discourse. So this is, trying to convince a teacher, boss, government official to take a position. And we have a rubric available for that and some means and standard deviations to help with interpretation. So, if you're working more that middle school, high school, and you're interested in that higher level language, then I would think that these expository and persuasive tasks could be a really good fit for you. The final thing we have is kind of, if you don't know where to start, don't know where to go, cubed seems too overwhelming, but I want to get into something like narrative. Also, with the SALT group, we developed some narrative measures here. So this is just a basic narrative rubric, looking at some of those main story grammar types of categories. You could use some of the wordless picture books that are used a lot, like frog stories and things. But, if you just wanted to get in there and try something and start figuring out what it would look like to collect and analyze language samples, this might be an easy entry for you. It's not going to have as much as in the way of norms to help with interpretation, but if you just want to practice, having a child tell a story, looking for some story grammar components, that could be a good way to go. Now we have some other materials here. You could go on and on and on. If you're familiar with any of these, absolutely go for them. Continue to use them in your practice. The narrative assessment protocol, that also is a rubric-based narrative task. There's the Edmonton narrative norms, the main narrative assessment. So there's these other rubric-based narrative assessments. And then you may also have access to the test of narrative language, a norm reference language test. So take some time, look at these different options. You can look at some of the links and see what you think might be of interest to you. And then all you need to do for the application activity is open this survey. It's just a real quick survey that it's on the second page for me here, but it asks you, what experience do you have with these different tools? What's your interest level? What do you think if you had to choose today that you would choose? And then we can just get your name and district so that we can mark you as complete for having done this application activity. So that's what we got for you. Hope you're doing well and looking forward to talking to you again and talking about language sampling.